Thank everybody for just coming out. It's my honor and privilege to be here to talk amongst like-minded people who believe in solidarity and weaponizing that solidarity against not only the employers, but this is also a global struggle. So it's good to be here to talk about that. So up here we have Labor, May Day, and the general strike. So in my recent travels, just campaigning, there was a member in Local 89 in Kentucky who asked me, Hooker, what do you feel about and how do you feel about a general strike? I told that brother the same thing I'm gonna tell you guys. I'm trying to figure out why we not on a general strike at this present moment. I don't. Whenever you have the pro-pedophile, pro-Epstein, Donald Trump come out and his first day in office takes away 50,000 workers their contract away from them. Why are we not on the street? Right. I'm still trying to figure it out. Then turns around and eliminates another million workers contract. Why are we not on the street? But this is a plan by that class to attack labor because they understand our power. They understand that without us, there is no capital. That's right. There is no profit. Our labor is their profit and is their capital. Mm-hmm. If we withhold that, then we are the ones with that power. Yeah. But how do we get to that point? How do we get to our members and other non-union workers alike and let them know that it's the CEO who needs you and not the other way around? Right. How do we explain that to people where they can understand that without my labor, if I keep my hands in my pocket right now today, nothing moves. Nobody is behind the truck. Nobody is flying the plane. Nobody is delivering the medicine. Nobody is doing anything. But how do we get to that point where our members can understand that? And today I hope that we can have a discussion till we can start moving to that point. Because to be honest, I was shocked to hear the mayor of Chicago not long ago talk about there needs to be a general strike. Mm-hmm. So people are starting to wake up, and they're starting to understand the power that the working class have. But I think we're going to have to really start having more meetings like this, conversations like this, and have this spread because, again, in order for the working class to win, we're going to have a general strike. There's no other way around it. Yeah. UPS workers, So I come from UPS. I don't want to make this all about UPS. I got my brother here, Luke, but he understands this as well. So UPS does not have any profit, does anything without the work that the Teamsters do. They don't make anything. They don't manufacture anything. If workers don't show up to work on tomorrow, guess what happens at UPS? Nothing. Nothing moves. Nothing gets delivered. Nobody's flying the plane. Nothing gets sorted. That's the power that the working class has. So let's talk about this here, Labor, May Day, and a general strike. How many are looking forward to this May Day coming up? Good. And I want to give a big shout out to the AFL-CIO here in the city who is actually pushing this agenda because I know last year we had a ton of people that came out, and I'm looking and I'm thinking that it's going to be even bigger this year. And I know Luke has been an advocate for our local because I'm going all everywhere, so I can't really get there. But I want to give a shout out to Luke for just standing in the gap for me. So May Day, there was a lot of sacrifice and struggle to make that day happen. And I know we're celebrating and we should, but don't take away what happened to get to that point. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people sacrificed for that day to happen. And we should never disrespect that sacrifice, and we should honor that sacrifice by participating in this upcoming May Day. So if you can call out of work, don't show up for work, don't spend no money, whatever it is that you can withhold for capitalism not to win that day, that's what we need to do. But I also want to suggest this to you, to everybody here as well. May Day should not just be predicated to May 1st. It should be an ongoing thing. It should be May Day every day, right? That's the attitude that we need to have moving forward. It should be May Day every single day. The employers, the ruling class, the Epstein class, the pedophile class, all those people need to know that if we mess with these workers, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be May Day every single day. And now I know there's some slides up here. Somebody going to have to help me out up here. Where I'm going here. Right here? There we go. There we go. So the labor movement. So how many people in here are in a union? Good. So I come from a little small town in North Carolina. Belhaven's got 2 stoplights. So North Carolina is also a right-to-work state. So prior to me coming up to Philadelphia, I had no idea what a union was because they don't teach anything about the labor movement in schools. I don't know if you guys know that. They don't teach anything about unions in schools. Right. And do you guys know why that is? You guys know why. They don't want us to have any power. Because they know that an uneducated worker is an asset to them and a liability to the rest of the working class. So we got to make sure that we educate our members. All right. And I think that's what the labor movement has to focus more on, is educating our workers. And I'm not just talking about coming to a union meeting, hey, this is what happened this month, this is the finances. I'm talking about teaching about civics. Why is it important for labor to show up at the polls? Because your landlord is going to be there. Your employer is going to be there. The person that makes the prices for all the stuff that you buy is going to be there. So you have to make sure that you are there because your pension fund is there, your union contract is there. So wherever your ability is to make sure that you can take care of your family, you need to show up. Your union contract does that. But if you don't show up to vote, guess what happens? What are we showing the employer when members don't vote, when members don't come out, when people don't show up and do anything? We're showing them that we don't care. And I'm quite sure that people do care about having a pension. And I know they care about having a contract. I do. But somewhere along the line, we have to educate and empower our members on the importance of showing up in this labor movement. The officials are not the movement. I'm going to say that one more time. The officials are not the movement. It's the workers. Just like if we don't show up to go to work, what happens if the workers decide, you know what? And I know this is going to sound crazy coming from an elected official, but guess what happens if the workers decide, you know what, man, I don't want to pay dues anymore. You know, I don't want to give any money to my officials because they're not doing anything. They're not working for me, right? So we have to make sure that we educate our members and empower them. Number one, to hold us accountable when we do things that we shouldn't do. Because this is a two-way street. They hold us accountable. We have to hold our members accountable and the working class accountable. You have to show up and you have to vote. Vote for your contract. If you don't show up and vote for your contract, but you're telling the employer that you don't care. And that's something that I think all of us are going to have to do. We're going to have to start educating and empowering our members on their contract. Let them know the sacrifice of May 1st. I can guarantee you not a lot of workers in unions know anything about May Day or the significance of that, or the 1934 in Minneapolis. They don't know those things, and I think that's where we fall short as leaders, is we don't tell them the struggle of how we got here. All right, for an example, and I know I'm going to throw Luke under the bus and all of his UPS co-workers, but you can tell a difference between a UPS worker and, say, one of our school bus drivers. There's a difference. UPS workers come in, and I got a school bus driver for 384 here. You can, and this is where the labor movement, we have to come together and weaponize the solidarity. It's not the UPS worker versus the school bus driver. It's all of us together. But you can tell a difference, and I'm going to tell you what that difference is. UPS workers come in, they get high wages, benefits, they get all these great things. Didn't have to really work for it. You just come in, you sign up, and you start getting those things. Somebody fighting for their very first contract, fighting to get in the union, they're gonna go hard to get that. They're gonna hold the company accountable. I can tell you right now, I got a couple of shop stewards at my school bus unit. Oh my God, they fight like I've never seen anybody. I got another group coming on. We have meetings every day about how they are planning to fight the employer, because they know the fight and the struggle. UPS workers, they come in to a great situation that was fought for decades and years ago. And so that's why the labor movement has to take time to explain to all of our members that these things weren't handed to you guys. There was a lot of sacrifice. Ron Kerry used to be the general president back before I started working. And he took a position that he was going to fight not only the employer, but also the bureaucracy in the union. And he paid a price for that. They kicked him out of the union, and UPS was happy to see him go. But the labor movement, they have to know that there's people out there who are willing to do whatever it takes for the workers to win, right? And so I think we have to, as a labor movement, we have to do a better job at educating our members, empowering them, letting them know this is not us versus each other. It's us versus the employer class, us versus the ruling class, us versus the Epstein pro-pedophile class. That's what we have to, that's what it has to be, all right? May Day. So I've been talking about that throughout the whole time I've been up here. This is going to be a very important demonstration for labor, especially in this city. But not just in this city, but for the whole entire world. Like the MC for the day, she talked about earlier, is that, this is a global struggle. This is not an American struggle. This is not just a Cuban struggle. This is not an Iran struggle. This is a global struggle. And workers are everywhere. They're not just here in the United States. They're everywhere. And so we have to come together and weaponize this May Day and let folks know that the working class is here and we're here to stay. We don't care who's in the White House. We don't care because we run America. There was this commercial back in the day that said, America runs on Duncan? Yeah. No. It runs on labor. Yeah. That's what happens, right? And I think people see that, especially after the COVID pandemic. What happens if the workers don't show up during COVID? What happens? We got a doctor here. What happens if she don't go to work during COVID? What happens if Luke don't want to go to work? Say, man, I don't feel like it today, right? Nothing gets delivered. No patients get help. America dies without the workers. Just think about that. America dies. Capitalism dies without labor. And that has to be our conviction every day. Every day we go to work, this company does not survive without me. And I know our bosses want us to think that they're the best thing in the world, man. It's because of us you have this. No. It's because of my blood, sweat, and tears. Right. The people that came before me is the reason why I have this. The reason why I'm standing before you guys here today is because a lot of people walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge who wanted a chance to vote to get me to a position where I could be the first ever African-American to lead the local. We have to honor our ancestors, the people that came before us. So again, please don't take this May Day lightly. It's very, very important because, we got another 3 years of Epstein, man, right? And so we got to make sure that we're ready to fight back. We have to. Don't ever take an opportunity to fight back and push back against the ruling class because they don't have no, they don't care about us. So why should we care about them? Why? And this is something that we go through in my own union. They feel as though that they owe the company something. You don't owe them anything. All you owe them is a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. That's it. Anything else, man, you're giving them too much. Think you're giving them too much. This is my favorite thing right here, y'all. Yeah. The general strike. Like I said in the beginning, I met this brother in Kentucky, and he asked me how I felt about it, and I told him, to this day, I'm still trying to figure out why we're not on the street. If you guys got any answers that can help me understand that, I'm open. I think nobody should be working right now. Nobody. You want to go and bomb Iran, but we got potholes everywhere in the street here. You want to go bomb and shut down this, but people don't have access to health care or it's tied into their job? Why we ain't on the street? I'm still trying to figure out. God can take away contracts from working class people, and it's okay. Shoot people dead in the street in Minnesota, and we still going to work. Why is that? Some of this stuff is on us. We have to take ownership. We can't keep blaming Trump for what he's doing. Some of it is our responsibility. Why haven't we organized? Hey man, we just ain't going to work. We ain't spending no money. Until you do right. What did Seeley say to Mr. in Color Purple? Until you do right by me. That's right. That's the attitude that we need to have. Until you do right by every single worker, we're going to make sure everything you do is going to fail. That's what we're going to have to do. And I get so aggravated about why we're not on the street, because I see this stuff every single day, right? You're dealing with it with the employers you deal with. They think that they just God's gift to the work to us, not the other way around. I don't believe in that. When somebody gets up and go to work and gives you the most important commodity in this country, their labor, and you disrespect them and disregard them, why are we not on the street, man? What did Tupac say? You got money for war?
Can't feed the poor.
Bingo. So y'all got it. Y'all got it. So why are we still going to work? Why? And I know, and again, and I know this is a capitalistic system, and I get that, but there's ways we can win. And I think this May Day and other King's Day rallies and things like that. But after we do that, what's the next step? After we done marched and say no kings, and we stood on the side of the road, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo, what's the next step? After we go to this May 1st job action or city action or sit-in, what's the next step? Are we closer to really having a general strike after we do these things? And I think once we have it, I think these are the conversations that we're going to have, because nothing is going to change within our working class unless we do this right here, the general strike. Because guess what? 1934, what happened? They withhold their labor, everything changed for the working class. 8-hour day, 40 hours a week, weekends off, no kids getting slaughtered at work. But it took action. It took action, right? Yeah, sacrifices had to be made, right? But I think if labor were to pull our resources together, we can win this thing. If the Teamsters, AFL, SEIU, and all this kind of things, all of us get together, and I apologize. I apologize for our general president, just to let you guys know. I don't know. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm running. I don't know what happened. I don't understand how you can preach solidarity and then isolate yourself from the rest of solidarity. I mean, from the working class. I don't understand that. Where does that work? It hasn't worked. What has Epstein man done for the working class? Not a thing. How has your life been better since Epstein man been in there? How has it? Gas is $1 million a gallon now. Potholes everywhere in the street. Eggs, I don't even eat eggs, but eggs are expensive. Everything is more expensive now. And what my man said, everything is going to be lower. We're not going to go to war. We're not going to do this. We bombing Iran. We going in to take my man from Venezuela. We're just doing whatever we want to do. Why are we not in the street? That's my question to everybody here. Why are we not in the street? Go ask your coworkers tomorrow. Why are we not in the street? And see what they say. Start having these conversations. If you want things to get better, we're going to have to withhold our labor.
And it's actually kind of fitting that we're talking about May Day and we're talking about Cuba. In Cuba, May Day is a national holiday, and there's like every single member of society takes to the streets to remember the martyrs of Chicago. And I think that's really interesting. You can ask any Cuban worker, and they'll know exactly who the martyrs are, why this day was established, and what it means for workers not only in Cuba, but for the entire world. So we're going to talk today about, oh yeah, the clicker. We got that. We're going to talk today about Cuba, the blockade on Cuba, and Cuba's achievements despite the blockade, and solidarity with Cuba. But I think, to not make it really like, oh, what is this island and what do they do and how cool is socialism? That's so awesome. I think it's really important, as Gabby said, to kind of understand that it's not just another country where socialism is happening and there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening, but really what it means for us in the United States, because in a lot of ways, the reason that Cuba is under the blockade that it is under and the conditions that it faces today is because of its relationship to us here in the United States. Cuba is an island that is only 90 miles away from the coast of Florida. That's extremely close. I think that's shorter maybe than the distance from New York to Philly. Yeah, that's that. I believe. I did not drive here. I took the bus, so couldn't tell you. But it's really close. And I think it's important to highlight that because an island that close, you would think, wow, like there must be a lot of exchange with Cuba. They're really just off the coast. There's a lot of, cultural and political and social similarities with Cuba. But incidentally, Cuba is almost completely siloed and isolated from us here in the United States. It's a place we know very little about. It's a place that maybe we hear a headline or two, the dictatorship, the blackouts. But otherwise, people in the United States essentially are blockaded from knowing about what's happening there. People are not even able to travel freely there. And there's a lot of countries in the world where people with U.S. passports can just go to, no issues. And for some reason, the island that is 90 miles away, we are not able to go there too. You can go with very specific licenses, and it has to be very, very regulated. And so I think the question is, why is it that the U.S. laws are structured in such a way that completely limits us here in the United States from actually engaging with Cuba? So does anyone want to shout anything out? Why is it that we're so insulated because of our own government to even know what's happening?
Because they had a revolution right under our noses.
Yeah? Anyone else?
Basically treated them as a sugar plantation for the 60 years that we controlled them after, quote unquote, liberating them from the Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah, all of that's correct. And Cuba, because it had a revolution, is an example. And it's example not only for nations in the global south, which after Cuba's revolution were inspired and in a lot of places, took the example of Cuba and brought it to their own struggles. But it's also an example for us here in the United States. And it's an example, as Gabby said before, of what a society can achieve when all the resources of the state are essentially directed towards the betterment of people and the pursuit of their safety, dignity, and well-being. And that in itself is an existential threat to the United States government, because that is an example that they do not want. They do not want us to know what it means when a people rise up, take control, and actually say, we're going to use the budget not to fund war, but to fund healthcare. And that's also why, for the past 6 decades, the U.S. has imposed an extremely comprehensive web of sanctions, quote, trade embargoes, and coercive measures that basically prevent not only people and companies within the United States from doing any business with Cuba, but also completely isolates Cuba on the international stage and prevents most companies everywhere from doing business with Cuba. And this is what we refer to as the blockade of Cuba. So I know I just said a little bit about it, but does anyone want to shout out anything they know about the blockade on Cuba? Oops. Yeah, real. Anything else? Yeah, Dakota.
I know I read somewhere that every year they vote on it at the UN, and every year basically every country in the world condemns it and demands that it be lifted, except for I think us in Israel, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, well, the blockade is many things. As I said, it is a web of sanctions. It's a web of laws and restrictions. And the main goal is to isolate and strangle Cuba. And this is not just the view of someone who believes Cuba should not be under blockade, but this is actually the view of the U.S. government itself. And so in 1960, Lester Mallory, who was working in the U.S. government, released this famous memorandum, which is now cited by by many, called the Lester-Mallory Memorandum, and it's titled, I think it's titled something like The Decline and Fall of Castro. April 6, 1960. Spoiler, he was not successful. But in this memorandum, it essentially outlines why the blockade and why Cuba. And so it says, I'll read it because I think it's good to hear it from the horse's mouth. Salient considerations respecting the life of the present government of Cuba are, and by the way, this is 1960 April, so 15 months after the Cuban people won the revolution. The majority of Cubans support Castro. 2, there is no effective political opposition. 3, Fidel Castro and other members of the Cuban government espouse or condone communist influence. 4, communist influence is pervading the government and body politic at an amazingly fast rate. 5, militant opposition to Castro from without Cuba would only serve his and the communist cause. 6, the only foreseeable means of alienating internal support is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic satisfaction and hardship. So that's the most important point. Economic dissatisfaction and hardship. And again, the point being that this is because a political reason, because the government of Cuba is communist, because the majority of the people support the communist government, and because that is, again, completely untenable for the United States. So this is, again, the official U.S. reason for the blockade that has been upheld by every single U.S. president since 1960, and since Cuba declared that its revolution was socialist. And you really to talk about all of the different laws that go into the blockade, it would be hours and weeks, because once again, not only did every single U.S. president since 1960 uphold the blockade, but almost all presidents added more laws and more sanctions to actually strengthen the blockade as it stands. And there's a lot of really, really good resources to learn about some of the different and specific laws, and I highly recommend them. But these are just kind of some basic numbers that can help us understand what does this blockade mean? Because people talk a lot about the blockade. It's even become kind of a joke amongst U.S. politicians. They say, these Cubans keep talking about the blockade. It has nothing to do with the blockade. It's just that they're all corrupt, which is a crazy notion because reports, very meticulous reports, have basically calculated that since 1960, the blockade has caused Cuba, and this is accounting for inflation, $1.4 trillion in damages. And just from 2023 to 2024, one year of the blockade, it caused $5 billion in damages. And sometimes it's hard to kind of understand what these numbers actually mean concretely and materially. But for example, one way to think of it is that Cuba is a country that has universal health care, universal education, guarantees housing, electricity, water, basic food to all of its citizens. So if in 1 year it loses $5 billion, that means $5 billion worth of medicine, textbooks, syringes, food, and other essential products that Cuba cannot give to its citizens. And so I think, big number, but it is actually human and material impacts. But the blockade is not just about damages and Cuba losing money, but it also means that Cuba cannot use the money that it has to even just buy medicine, to buy different parts it needs for machines, etc. And because of the blockade and then Cuba, and then the strengthening of the blockade, especially under Donald Trump in his first term, Cuba was included on the state sponsors of terrorism list, which I'll explain in a minute. which means that kind of all banks internationally have now seen Cuba as like a very risky investment. So if you're a bank and there's a country and some business from that country that is considered by the United States, which is the most powerful economy in the world, as a sponsor of terrorism, you're going to be over compliant and not actually process those transactions because, why do a little bit of business with Cuba when you could do a lot of business with the United States? And that essentially has had a huge impact, this element of over compliance with measures, and especially with the state sponsor of terrorism. And then another example, again, there's like thousands, but this one is particularly crazy, the Torricelli Act. And this was pushed by a Democrat from New Jersey. I love New Jersey, but man, they got some crazy guys. Yeah, true. Yeah, Democrats. Jersey is part of Philly, right? Whoa, that was the most controversial part of this. So good old Mr. Torricelli in 1992 said that this act, which became law, would have the objective to, quote, wreak havoc on the island and tighten the blockade on Cuba. And this was passed in 1992, the year that I was born. But it was passed that I just had to, right after the Soviet Union fell and Cuba was in the special period. And the US said, wow, right now would be a really great moment to just suffocate Cuba because it just lost its biggest trading partner. And this was when the US said almost daily, like, Cuba's gonna fall. Again, spoiler alert, Cuba did not fall. But the US essentially implemented a whole new slew of measures to try to make it fall, to squeeze the economy, to, as Henry Kissinger said about Chile in 1970s, to make the economy scream. And the Torricelli Act banned foreign subsidiaries of US companies from doing any trading with Cuba, prohibited ships from docking in US ports 180 days after visiting Cuba, and as we know, Cuba's US neighbor, so it's quite close. And of course, this worsened economic shortages on the island, prevented medical and food imports at a moment where Cuba was really suffering. They had just lost its biggest trade partner. And one of the elements of this law, which continues to be like a huge impediment to people doing business with Cuba, is the 10% component parts rule, which essentially prohibits the sale of goods to Cuba from third countries, so not even from the United States, if more than 10% of that item was manufactured in the United States. And so we know globalization, things are made in 100 countries and they make one product. So this really limits, again, goods from being sold to Cuba. So again, the blockade is not only taking money away from Cuba, but it is prohibiting it from getting essential things it needs to function. In hospitals, you need a lot of different machines to basically carry out any normal task, and a lot of those things are made in the United States, manufactured in the United States. That is a huge impediment on the Cuban health system. It's a huge impediment on its electrical grid. It's a huge impediment on every single element of life that Cuba needs to function. And then the last thing I'd say just about the blockade is just to expand a little bit on kind of what has been the worst tightening, in a sense, of the blockade, which is what took place under Donald Trump, who not only added 243 unilateral coercive measures against Cuba, sanctions, but included Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list, as I said, which makes it very toxic for anyone to do business with Cuba. And why Cuba was included on the list is very important to point out. It was because Cuba was sponsoring the peace talks between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army of Colombia. So Cuba was hosting peace talks, and somehow it became a state sponsor of terror, and Cuba refused to give up U.S. political prisoners to the United States. So anyone know which political prisoner they were talking about? Asada. So Cuba refused until, obviously her last dying day to ever give up Asada Shakur, and the U.S. made Cuba pay for that. And Cuba never relented. So I think that's a huge thing we need to remember. So I think we once again come to the question, why is it that the U.S. is so eager to hide, to strangle, and so eager to blockade Cuba? Because it's not like they invest all this money and, spend all this time devising what other policy to put on this island of 11 million people for nothing. And so I think that lies in, again, Cuba's example and what it's been able to achieve and what it has been able to do to inspire the entire world and, of course, people here in the United States. And so it's like, what do they not want us to know? So in Cuba, education is a right. And I think we can all say from experience growing up here in the United States that education is everything but a right. Obviously here, just to access higher education, it means either joining the army or going 100K into debt. And that is a choice, or just not going. And in Cuba, all people have access to free and quality education at all levels. And you often hear people saying like, oh, why study arts? Why study philosophy or the humanities? It's like, you're not going to get a job in that. Whereas in Cuba, in a society where education is free and where all workers, have dignified jobs, it is not seen as a frivolous pursuit to study such things because it is part of what makes society run, and it is, considered an integral part of human nature in society. So I think all of us know what it means to not have access to real education. What do we learn in school? And how are we even kind of judged if that was like a quality education or not? And I think that probably the thing that resonates most for people is Cuba's approach to healthcare. Guaranteeing health for all is so difficult to even imagine in a society like the United States, where we pay copays, deductibles, or whatever that is. We pay hundreds of dollars a month to even get the insurance, for which we then have to pay even more on top of that. And then that insurance even then rejects you for the treatments. In Cuba, that is not even, I think people get confused when you even say the word insurance. They're like, what do you mean? Cuba, and obviously in order to do that, that means they have invested a lot, not only in people going to medical school and training doctors, but having all sorts of healthcare workers, having health centers in all neighborhoods, having all levels of giving people access to healthcare. And the emphasis is always on prevention. Cuba is one of the countries with the highest doctor-to-patient ratios in the world, between 8.4 to 9.4 physicians per 1,000 people. In the U.S., it is actually only at 3.7 per 1,000 people. And the U.S. is one of the countries that actually spends the most on healthcare, but has one of the worst healthcare outcomes. And is not only just providing that care to people on the level of prevention, but also Cuba has invested heavily in research and development. And so a lot of people will say, well, capitalism is great because it fosters competition, and competition makes advancements. Well, Cuba has a lung cancer vaccine. They have a diabetes treatment that Gabby mentioned before that reduces diabetes-related amputations. This treatment has been available since 2006. So why is it that diabetes patients in the United States, and disproportionately people who suffer from diabetes-related amputations, are Black in this country? Why is it that treatment is not available? Cuba also has developed an Alzheimer's treatment which significantly slows and stops the onset of Alzheimer's symptoms. I mean, this is massive. And if anyone follows the pharmaceutical industry, they'll know that there was like crazy drama a couple of years ago because a company invested like billions into research on an Alzheimer's drug that turns out it did nothing. And Cuba also invented 5 COVID vaccines because they were blocked from actually getting access to the COVID vaccines developed in the United States and in Europe. So that's a lot. And all of this under blockade and under massive, massive international pressure. And this also means, like, again, there's not enough time to explain like all of the levels of the blockade or even kind of go into that. But this means that like Cuba's even blocked from one of the essential elements of like scientific research, which is peer sharing. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I know that that's a big element of it, and sharing, you know, results, all of this. There's a lot of efforts to you know, push Cuba out of these spaces. And so that's, of course, impacts your ability, your scientists' ability to make advancements. And then even, again, the impact on scientists in the U.S., healthcare professionals in the U.S. to have access to the advancements that they've made. And then the other element of, you know, advances of Cuba is international solidarity. And I think for a lot of people who know Cuba, it's like the embodiment of international solidarity, whether it's, you know, keeping Assad safe all of those years, sending brigades of doctors and health workers to over 40 countries across the world during the pandemic, many countries in the Caribbean, in the global south, but even Italy, training doctors from across the world for free, including hundreds from Palestine who then go back to Palestine and serve their communities. There's historical examples. Cuba sent over 300,000 fighters, but also healthcare professionals and other professionals to serve in Angola when they were fighting the South African apartheid-backed militias. So, I mean, Cuba has helped liberate the world, and it continues to make these immense sacrifices for humanity, all while under a blockade. So I think it's very clear why the U.S. wants to completely kind of keep it away from us. But what has also been clear over the decades since the U.S. has implemented this policy is that not only will the people of the world not tolerate this, like Dakota mentioned, for the past 3 decades at the UN, it's an almost unanimous vote condemning the U.S. blockade on Cuba. But also there have been decades of a robust solidarity movement, again, not just across the world, but even here in the United States. And the recent example of this was the Nuestra Humanitarian Aid Convoy, which was called for in the latest kind of surge of measures against Cuba, which was kind of this embodied by the fuel blockade that Trump imposed on Cuba officially in January, on January 31st, but really had been in effect since December when there was the massive deployment of the military in the Caribbean. So from essentially December until 2 weeks ago when the Russian oil tanker arrived to Cuba, there had been no fuel that entered the island. This is because there was, again, the deployment of the military in the Caribbean, which blocked all Venezuelan ships from going to Cuba. And then in January, the U.S. government imposed this measure calling Cuba an unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States national security. Do you all think that Cuba is a threat to your security or safety? Yeah, and they essentially, this measure threatened 20% tariffs on any nation that would send fuel to Cuba, and then already had a naval blockade preventing Venezuela from doing so. And this obviously aggravated previously very difficult circumstances on the island. In healthcare facilities, for example, There are currently 100,000 patients that are awaiting surgery because it is just impossible to keep all of these healthcare facilities functioning at normal capacity due to the fuel shortages. There's rationing plans underway. University has moved to completely online, and obviously given the rolling blackouts, internet access is seriously inhibited, so university students are of course receiving, having their education being impeded. But this solidarity effort was launched in February, and in March, hundreds of activists converged in Cuba as part of this convoy to kind of, on one hand, deliver material aid to the Cuban people, healthcare supplies, et cetera, but also to reaffirm that the people of the world stand with Cuba, as they have for the past 6 decades, and that Donald Trump can threaten the world, he can threaten Iran, he can threaten Venezuela, he can feel emboldened, but the people of the world are not going to stand for that and are always going to stand with Cuba. And as part of this, there's a very exciting fundraiser that is underway to send solar panels and generators to Cuba, because Cuba is currently doing a green energy transition. Unfortunately, all of the green energy warriors are not seeing it as such. We got to get those environmentalist movements on board. But they are doing a massive transition to green energy because they realize how vulnerable they are, exemplified by this fuel blockade. So I think there's a 40% increase from last year of creation and dependency on solar energy now in Cuba. So I know that there's stuff for sale downstairs to support this fundraiser. It's for Let Cuba Live. I think the main, as we learn about Cuba, it's not just, again, to learn of this amazing, incredible nation that has resisted for over 60 years attacks from U.S. imperialism. And, we didn't even get into the terrorist attacks that U.S. has waged against Cuba, invasions, fomenting opposition, etc. But it has resisted. But we learn about Cuba to also understand, again, why is the U.S. so set on kind of hiding this reality from the people of the United States? And what could Cuba look like if it were not under the boot of U.S. imperialism? And what could that relationship with Cuba look like for us, for people of the United States? So I think there's a lot there. The movement with Cuba is really growing and it's resurging, and I think so many young people are so interested in what Cuba has been able to achieve and supporting the island right now. So it's very exciting. May Day, of course, is a big day, not only in the United States, it will be a general strike, but also Cuba. So I think with that, I'll end it.